The story begins on Christmas night, but this is far from the warm and cheerful holiday evening anyone would expect. Santa Claus has been working nonstop, and after spending a little too much time among ordinary people, he is about to get dragged into something much darker. What starts as another routine night, delivering presents, soon turns into a violent nightmare when he discovers a young girl caught in the middle of a dangerous robbery. And once Santa realizes innocent lives are at risk, a side of him that has been buried for a very long time begins to surface. The movie first takes us to Bristol in the United Kingdom, where Santa is sitting alone inside a bar, drinking heavily. He looks exhausted, frustrated, and completely fed up with the job. After finishing his glass, he immediately asks the bartender to pour him another. Not long afterward, another man wearing a Santa costume walks into the bar. Seeing someone dressed exactly like him, the man assumes they are both seasonal workers and casually asks whether Santa has just finished his shift. Santa tells him he is only taking a short break before continuing his rounds. He explains that the reindeer already know exactly where they need to go, so most of the time he simply sits in the sleigh and lets them handle the navigation. Naturally, the other fake Santa and the bartender think he is joking. Santa continues drinking before admitting that he has seriously considered giving up the entire Christmas routine. After centuries of delivering presents, he feels like the holiday has changed. In his eyes, children have become increasingly obsessed with expensive things, constantly wanting more without appreciating what they already have. The magic of Christmas seems to have disappeared, and Santa is beginning to wonder why he still bothers. Eventually, he gets up from the bar and heads toward a door that leads to the rooftop. Before leaving, however, Santa gives the bartender a wrapped present and tells her it is for her grandson. The gesture immediately confuses her because she never told this stranger anything about her family, especially her grandson's name. A moment later, she realizes Santa is heading toward what she assumes is the wrong exit, so she follows him upstairs. But when she reaches the roof, he has vanished. She searches around, completely puzzled, until she finally looks toward the sky. That's when she sees an actual sleigh flying away above the building. The bartender stares in disbelief, realizing the drunken man from the bar might genuinely have been Santa Claus. Unfortunately, the magical moment does not last long. Santa suddenly becomes sick from all the alcohol he consumed and throws up from the sleigh, directly onto the stunned bartender below. From there, the movie shifts across the Atlantic to Greenwich, Connecticut. Jason Lightstone is waiting for his estranged wife, Linda, to arrive and pick him up. Their marriage is clearly going through serious problems, but for the sake of Christmas, they are still trying to spend time together as a family. When Linda arrives, Jason greets both her and their young daughter, Trudy. He thanks Linda for agreeing to accompany him to his mother's estate, knowing the family gathering is probably the last place either of them wants to be. The three soon reach the enormous Lightstone property, where a security gatekeeper recognizes them and allows their vehicle through. Inside the mansion, preparations for the Christmas celebration are already well underway. Staff members move throughout the house making sure everything is ready, while the Lightstone family gathers under the same roof. Later that evening, Jason, Linda, and Trudy enter the main living area, where Jason's sister Alva is already waiting with her son Brett and her boyfriend. The atmosphere between the siblings is noticeably competitive. When they hear that their mother is approaching, Alva immediately rushes toward the entrance with her family, determined to be the first one there to greet her. She notices Jason remaining farther back and becomes suspicious. Alva asks what exactly he is planning, clearly believing that Jason has some hidden reason for acting differently. Her boyfriend agrees, suggesting that Jason must be trying to gain some kind of advantage. Eventually, they move toward the rear of the room, where Jason and Linda are standing. After the family dinner ends, everyone begins retiring to their bedrooms for the night. Jason and Linda take Trudy upstairs and tuck her into bed. While they are getting her comfortable, Trudy reminds Jason that he forgot to take her to the mall earlier so she could meet Santa. Because of that, she never had the chance to tell Santa what she wanted for Christmas. Jason immediately feels bad. Trying to make up for it, he tells Trudy she can have one of her presents early. He hands her a walkie-talkie and convinces her that the device has a special connection to Santa Claus. According to Jason, if she speaks into it, Santa will be able to hear her Christmas wish. Trudy believes him. Jason and Linda then leave the bedroom, unaware of what their daughter is about to say. Once she is alone, Trudy picks up the walkie-talkie and quietly speaks to Santa. But instead of asking for toys, electronics, or anything expensive, she makes a much more personal wish. The only thing Trudy wants for Christmas is for her mother and father to fall in love again and become a family. Meanwhile, the real Santa continues traveling from home to home, delivering presents throughout the night. He is still drinking as he works, becoming increasingly intoxicated as the hours pass. Eventually, his route brings him to the Lightstone estate. Santa enters the enormous house and notices the cookies Trudy left behind for him. After helping himself, he discovers a bottle of alcohol nearby and decides to take that too. Rather than immediately continuing with his deliveries, he drops into a massage chair and allows himself a few moments to relax. What Santa doesn't realize is that something far more dangerous is already unfolding elsewhere inside the estate. One of the Lightstone family's security guards enters the security room. Instead of checking on his colleague, he suddenly attacks the guard who is currently on duty and knocks him unconscious. The man is actually part of a larger operation. Once the security room has been taken under control, he contacts the rest of his team and lets them know that everything is ready. The robbery has officially begun. Outside the property, another member of the group arrives. This man goes by the name Mr. Scrooge. When he approaches the estate, the gatekeeper stops him. Mr. Scrooge calmly explains that one of his tires has been punctured and asks if the guard can help him replace it. Believing the story, the gatekeeper turns away to assist him. That single moment of trust proves fatal. As soon as the guard's back is turned, Mr. Scrooge pulls out his weapon and shoots him in the head, clearing the way for the rest of the attackers to enter the Lightstone estate. Mr. Scrooge's assault team quickly takes control of the Lightstone estate. His heavily armed mercenaries move through the property, eliminating guards and staff members before anyone has a real chance to react. Jason's mother is immediately escorted toward a secured panic room by her personal bodyguards. It looks like she might reach safety, but the moment they enter, Mr. Scrooge appears inside as well. Before her guards can stop him, he kills them and takes complete control of the room. Soon afterward, he gathers the rest of the Lightstone family together. Brett, Alva, her boyfriend, and Jason's mother are all forced into captivity as the attackers secure the mansion. While all of this is unfolding, Jason and Linda are somewhere else in the house having a tense conversation about their marriage. Linda finally tells Jason exactly what has been bothering her. She feels like he has become too distant and believes he has not been paying enough attention to Trudy. According to Linda, Jason's relationship with his wealthy and controlling mother has also created problems between them for years. Jason tries to keep the argument from getting worse. He tells Linda that he genuinely wants to repair their relationship and insists that his family fortune means far less to him than she thinks. In fact, Jason says he would be willing to walk away from the Lightstone company and even give up the family's money if doing so meant fixing things between them. Their conversation is suddenly interrupted when gunshots echo through the mansion. Elsewhere in the house, Santa hears the exact same thing. Realizing something dangerous is happening, he decides that staying inside is probably a terrible idea and attempts to leave immediately. Santa tries using his usual Christmas magic. He taps his nose, expecting himself to instantly travel through the chimney and appear on the roof. Nothing happens. He tries again, but his powers still refuse to cooperate. Apparently, being completely drunk has made his magical abilities much less reliable than usual. Meanwhile, the Lightstone family has been rounded up inside the main living room. As Santa searches for another way out of the house, one of Scrooge's mercenaries unexpectedly discovers him. The armed man clearly wasn't expecting to find the actual Santa Claus wandering through the mansion, but there isn't much time to question it. The two immediately start fighting. Santa struggles at first, but he eventually manages to overpower the attacker and sends him crashing through a window. Back in the living room, Jason's mother attempts to intimidate Mr. Scrooge by revealing that she has a private extraction team already heading toward the estate. She expects this information to make him reconsider the robbery. Instead, Scrooge remains completely calm. He tells her he already knows about the extraction team, including exactly when they are expected to arrive. Then he reveals something even more disturbing. Scrooge knows that approximately $30 million is being kept inside a secure vault somewhere on the property. Jason's mother tells him knowing about the money doesn't matter, because the vault is practically impossible to break into. Scrooge quickly proves that he has done his homework. He knows about the security system, and even knows that she possesses a remote-controlled mechanism that can alter the vault's locking configuration. Before she can do anything, he takes the remote away from her. He then orders members of his team to begin working on the vault and figure out how to gain access to the money. A short time later, one of the mercenaries contacts Scrooge and reports that one of their partners is no longer responding. That immediately raises suspicion. Scrooge orders his people to search the entire estate and locate anyone who may have slipped away during the initial attack. Santa, meanwhile, quietly makes his way back inside through another entrance. Since armed criminals now have control of the mansion, he decides to contact the authorities. He tries using the house phone, but quickly discovers that Scrooge's team has already cut the telephone lines. Before Santa can figure out another option, he hears approaching footsteps. He quickly ducks behind a pillar and stays out of sight. Knowing that another armed attacker is nearby, Santa begins digging through his enormous gift sack, desperately hoping to find something useful. Of course, the bag is filled with Christmas presents rather than weapons. A mercenary eventually steps into the room and slowly searches the area. Santa continues rummaging through the sack until he finally pulls out a doll. It's hardly the ideal weapon, but it will have to do. Waiting until the mercenary gets close enough, Santa sneaks up behind him and smashes the toy against the back of his head. The surprise attack causes the man's firearm to fall to the floor. Unfortunately, the mercenary is still very much alive. He immediately pulls out a knife and turns on Santa. Santa reaches back into his bag and finds something slightly more practical this time, a hockey stick. He swings it at the mercenary and lands another hit. For a moment, it looks like Santa has gained the advantage, but the attacker quickly recovers and starts overpowering him. The fight becomes increasingly brutal as the two struggle through the room. Santa clearly isn't used to spending Christmas Eve fighting professional criminals, yet something instinctive begins taking over. After a violent struggle, Santa finally manages to kill the mercenary. Inside the living room, Linda tries to keep Trudy calm by making her lie down and stay close. Trudy still has the walkie-talkie Jason gave her earlier. Believing she can contact Santa through it, she quietly turns it on and starts calling for him. At almost the same moment, Santa finds the dead mercenary's radio. As he listens to the device, he suddenly hears Trudy's voice coming through. Santa answers her. He asks the little girl where she is and what is happening. Trudy explains that she is trapped in the living room and that several dangerous men carrying guns have surrounded her family. Santa immediately understands just how serious the situation has become. He tells Trudy not to panic and promises that he is going to help her. Determined to find another way of calling for assistance, Santa heads toward the gatekeeper's station outside the mansion. When he reaches the hut, however, he discovers the same problem. The phones there have also been disabled. Then Santa hears Mr. Scrooge speaking over the mercenary radio. Scrooge is trying to contact the man Santa just fought. Instead of remaining silent, Santa answers him. He bluntly informs Scrooge that his mercenary is dead. Santa then gives him a warning. If Scrooge and his men don't leave the Lightstone family alone, Santa is coming after them next. The message completely frustrates Scrooge. He storms back into the living room and demands to know who the Lightstones hired to play Santa Claus. Jason's mother tells him the truth. Nobody hired anyone. There isn't supposed to be a Santa at the estate. Scrooge refuses to believe her. Convinced that the mysterious attacker must be part of some hidden security plan, he decides to pressure the family for answers. He grabs a decorative nutcracker and uses it to violently break one of Jason's fingers. Scrooge then threatens to continue torturing Jason until someone finally explains who this so-called Santa really is. Watching her father suffer, Trudy becomes terrified. She tells Scrooge that he had better stop hurting Jason because Santa is going to punish him. Linda quickly tries to protect her daughter by explaining that Trudy is simply pretending. But Trudy refuses to back down. She insists that Santa is real and that she has personally been speaking with him through the walkie-talkie. Jason realizes that his daughter's belief in Santa could put her in even greater danger. Desperate to keep Scrooge from focusing on her, he tells Trudy something he never wanted to say. Santa Claus isn't real. The words completely crush her. Upset and confused, Trudy runs away from the living room and escapes upstairs. She eventually hides herself in the attic, where she hopes the armed men won't find her. At the same time, Santa has finally gotten a moment to examine his injuries from the fight. He notices that he is bleeding badly. Using whatever supplies he can find, Santa begins stitching the wound himself. But he has already lost a dangerous amount of blood. His strength fades and he eventually collapses. While unconscious, Santa experiences a strange vision. Instead of seeing himself as the cheerful gift giver everyone knows, he sees another version of himself, a hardened warrior from a much darker period of his life. The vision hints that long before the red suit, the sleigh, and Christmas presents, Santa may have been someone very different. Then, through the darkness, he hears Trudy's voice coming over the radio. Her call pulls him back to consciousness. Trudy speaks into the walkie-talkie and finally asks the question that has been on her mind the entire night. Is he actually the real Santa Claus? Santa confirms that he is. But he also explains that being Santa does not mean he can magically fix every problem in someone's life. His abilities have limits, and unfortunately, he cannot simply force Jason and Linda to fall in love again just because Trudy wished for it. That isn't the kind of Christmas magic he controls. Back in the living room, one of Scrooge's mercenaries decides to force the Lightstones into opening their Christmas presents. It is an unsettling attempt to turn the family's own holiday celebration into part of their humiliation. Eventually, it becomes Jason's turn. Jason immediately starts acting as though he has somehow forgotten to bring a gift. But Brett notices something underneath the Christmas tree. Before Jason can stop him, Brett grabs the present and hands it over to his grandmother. Jason's mother opens it. Inside, instead of finding an ordinary Christmas gift, she discovers a written note. The second she reads it, her expression changes. Whatever Jason wrote clearly upsets her. However, she keeps the contents of the message to herself and refuses to explain what the letter says. Elsewhere, Trudy continues speaking with Santa. Curious about the strange things that have happened that night, she asks him about his life. Santa hesitates but eventually opens up about his past. Long ago, he wasn't a cheerful man delivering toys to children. He was a warrior, and not a particularly gentle one. Santa tells Trudy that he once fought people using a powerful hammer, and admits that violence was something he actually enjoyed. He killed his enemies without much hesitation, and looking back on the person he used to be, Santa jokes that he probably would have ranked extremely high on his own naughty list. Trudy doesn't judge him for it. Instead, she reminds him that whatever he may have done in the past, he is helping people now. To her, that means he cannot truly be a bad person. Her words clearly affect Santa. For someone who began the night questioning whether Christmas still mattered, Trudy's faith in him begins giving him a reason to keep going. Santa tells her to remain hidden and promises that he will deal with the armed men throughout the estate. Around the same time, Scrooge radios his team with an update. The private extraction unit mentioned earlier is almost at the property. Santa begins moving through the mansion again, searching for another mercenary. He spots one and tries to sneak up quietly. Unfortunately, as he moves through the room, he accidentally triggers one of the children's toys. The sudden noise immediately alerts the nearby attacker. Knowing he has been discovered, Santa quickly ducks into another room, but his hiding place doesn't last long. Scrooge reaches the door and forces his way through it. Santa is overwhelmed and captured. The mercenaries restrain him and begin questioning him. During the search, they discover Santa's enormous gift sack. At first glance, it appears almost completely empty. Then they reach inside. Present after present continues coming out. No matter how much they remove, there always seems to be something else hidden inside. The impossible nature of the sack leaves the mercenaries confused. Scrooge, however, has no interest in accepting what is right in front of him. He refuses to believe that the man they captured could actually be Santa Claus. To destroy whatever trick he thinks Santa is using, Scrooge throws the magical sack directly into the fireplace. The bag catches fire. Santa watches helplessly as one of the most important parts of his Christmas routine burns in front of him. Scrooge then explains why he has never believed in Santa. When he was around 10 years old, he once broke into a neighbor's home during Christmas because he wanted to steal the presents underneath their tree. While he was inside, he accidentally frightened the family's grandfather. The old man was so startled that he fell down the staircase and died. That tragedy became permanently connected to Christmas in Scrooge's mind. Deep down, part of him had always blamed Santa for what happened. Santa listens to the story but makes something very clear. He delivers presents. He doesn't control every event in a person's life, and he does not interfere with every choice people make. What happened that night was beyond his role. Scrooge doesn't find the explanation comforting. Before the confrontation can continue, Trudy makes her move. Still hidden elsewhere in the mansion, she pours a large amount of styrofoam balls into one of the ventilation systems. The tiny white pieces suddenly begin spilling through the house. The distraction draws the mercenaries' attention away from Santa. With everyone momentarily confused, Santa realizes he finally has an opening. He taps his nose. This time, the magic works. Santa instantly disappears and reappears on the roof. For a few seconds, it seems like he may finally have escaped. Then he notices vehicles arriving at the estate. The extraction team has reached the property. At first, Santa assumes they are there to rescue the Lightstone family. But something feels wrong. Santa checks his magical list. He finds the names of the extraction team members. Every one of them is listed as naughty. That's when Santa understands the truth. The supposed rescue team is actually working with Scrooge. The newcomers spot Santa almost immediately and begin firing at him. Santa manages to escape the gunfire and retreats into a nearby warehouse. Inside, exhausted and injured, he reaches one of his lowest points. the night has become increasingly hopeless. His sack is gone, the mansion is filled with armed criminals, and even the people who were supposed to rescue the family have betrayed them. For a moment, Santa considers giving up. Then Trudy's voice comes through the walkie-talkie again. She tells him that maybe he needs a Christmas miracle too. The words make Santa look around, and then he notices something. Hidden nearby is a hammer. The sight immediately takes him back to the warrior he used to be. Santa picks it up. This isn't just another random weapon. It reminds him of the brutal fighter he once was and the hammer he used during that earlier life. The exhausted Santa from the beginning of the night is suddenly gone. The warrior takes over. Santa charges the extraction team and begins fighting them one by one. Armed with the hammer and years of buried combat instinct, he tears through the supposedly elite soldiers. The battle becomes vicious, and Santa eliminates most of the extraction team before they have any chance of stopping him. While Santa is fighting outside, Scrooge's people finally manage to open the Lightstone family's vault. Scrooge walks inside expecting to find the $30 million he came for. Instead, the vault is empty. There isn't any money. Scrooge explodes with rage. He immediately returns to the hostages and demands an explanation. Someone has clearly moved the cash. With the situation getting worse, Jason finally admits the truth. He took it. Jason had stolen the $30 million himself. His plan had been to use the money to escape the influence of his mother and leave with Linda and Trudy. He wanted to walk away from the Lightstone family empire completely and finally build a life with his own family. Meanwhile, two mercenaries manage to locate Trudy in the attic. She quickly contacts Santa and tells him that they have found her hiding place. But Trudy hasn't simply been waiting helplessly. Inspired by Home Alone, she has transformed the attic into a collection of homemade traps. The two mercenaries enter expecting to grab an easy hostage. Instead, they walk directly into Trudy's setup. One trap after another catches them off guard. Despite being just a child, Trudy manages to incapacitate both attackers. Downstairs, the rest of the family begins fighting back as well. Linda, Brett, and Alva take advantage of an opportunity and overpower another mercenary. For the first time that night, the Lightstones are no longer simply waiting to be rescued. They are defending themselves. Soon afterwards, Santa reunites with Trudy, but Jason is still in danger. The surviving members of the extraction team have taken him outside because they need him to reveal where he hid the stolen money. Santa and Trudy head outside with the others to rescue him. Another violent confrontation begins. Linda joins the fight, determined to protect Jason. With Santa's help, she and the family manage to defeat most of the remaining extraction team members. During the chaos, Scrooge makes his escape. Santa sees him leaving and goes after him. The chase eventually leads to a final confrontation between the two men. Scrooge and Santa fight brutally, with both of them already injured and exhausted from everything that has happened. Neither is willing to back down. Scrooge continues attacking, convinced he can finally kill the man claiming to be Santa Claus. Santa realizes that brute force alone may not be enough, so he uses the one advantage Scrooge could never have prepared for: Christmas magic. During the fight, Santa activates his teleportation ability while holding onto Scrooge. Both men are instantly pulled upward through the chimney. Santa's magic transports them directly through the narrow structure and onto the top. Scrooge's body cannot survive the violent trip. The move kills him. But Santa pays an enormous price for it as well. Already badly wounded from everything that happened throughout the night, he collapses from his injuries. When Trudy and the others finally reach him, Santa appears to be dead. Trudy refuses to accept it. She believes that Santa's magic depends on people genuinely believing in him, so she asks everyone around her to say that Santa Claus is real. One after another, the Lightstones begin admitting that they believe. Even the adults who had dismissed Santa as a childhood fantasy join in. They acknowledge that the man lying in front of them really is Santa Claus. For several tense moments, nothing happens. Then Santa suddenly wakes up. Trudy's faith and the family's belief has somehow brought him back. The night has changed Santa too. At the beginning of the story, he was exhausted, drunk, and ready to abandon Christmas because he believed people no longer cared about what the holiday represented. But after meeting Trudy and seeing how strongly she believed in family, generosity, and him, he has found his purpose again. As the chaos finally settles, the familiar sound of Santa's reindeer can be heard approaching. His sleigh arrives at the estate, and waiting for him there is one final surprise. Since his original magical sack was destroyed in the fireplace, Santa's wife has sent him a replacement. A brand new sack is waiting on the sleigh. With his Christmas spirit restored, Santa climbs aboard, ready to continue the night's deliveries. The thing that really makes Violent Night work is that it doesn't treat Santa Claus like a one-note joke. At first, that's exactly what I expected. You see David Harbour stumbling around drunk, clearly fed up with Christmas, complaining about kids, consumerism, all of it, and you think, okay, I get the bit. This is angry Santa, bad Santa with a bigger body count, but the movie actually gives him more than that. This version of Santa is just tired, not fake tired either. He feels like somebody who has been doing the same job for way too long and has slowly watched the meaning behind it disappear. Kids want more stuff, everybody wants the newest thing, nobody seems grateful, and he's reached the point where Christmas feels less magical to him than it probably does to anyone else. And I like that because it gives Harbour something to play besides drunk jokes and fight scenes. He's irritated, messy, kind of miserable, but there's also this feeling that he misses believing in what he does. He hasn't completely stopped caring. He just doesn't really know why he should care anymore. Then the movie starts revealing that this Santa has a past, and not exactly the kind of past you'd expect from the guy eating cookies in your living room. Before becoming Santa, he was apparently a warrior, Nickamund the Red, and suddenly the whole premise makes a little more sense. He doesn't randomly become an action hero because the script needs him to. Violence is something buried inside this character already. Once he gets dragged into the home invasion, that old side of him starts coming back. That's probably one of my favorite ideas in the movie. You've got this guy dressed in red, carrying around Christmas presents, and somewhere underneath all of that is somebody who used to solve problems with a massive hammer. It's ridiculous, but it's the right kind of ridiculous. And the movie is smart enough not to explain every single thing about him. Santa has real magic. He can do things that obviously shouldn't be possible. He has the reindeer, the sack, the chimney stuff, all the traditional mythology. But even Santa doesn't seem to fully understand it. There's something funny about a magical character basically admitting, yeah, I don't really know how this works either. That little detail actually helps. It keeps the movie from getting bogged down in rules and explanations. This isn't trying to build some complicated Santa cinematic universe. Christmas magic exists. That's enough. Move on. Although at the same time, I kind of wanted more of it. That's one of the missed opportunities here. If you're going to give me a Viking Santa with supernatural Christmas abilities, go a little crazier with it. Give him more Christmas-specific tricks, more weird tools, more ways of turning Santa mythology into action movie weapons. The movie gets there occasionally, but you can see how much further the idea could have gone. Still, the important part is that Santa himself doesn't stay a gimmick. His relationship with Trudy slowly gives him a reason to stop thinking only about getting out of the house alive. She still believes in him when he barely seems to believe in himself anymore. And yeah, that gets a little sentimental in places, but it also gives the character somewhere to go. He starts the movie wanting Christmas to be over. By the time everything completely falls apart, he's fighting for the thing he thought he had stopped caring about. Not just the family, not even just Trudy. It feels more like he's trying to prove to himself that Christmas still means something. And that's why the character arc works better than it probably should. Because on paper, drunk Santa remembers he used to be a Viking and starts killing mercenaries. Sounds like a sketch, maybe a 10-minute joke. Something funny in a trailer that gets old very quickly. But Harbour gives the character enough exhaustion, frustration, and weirdly genuine warmth that Santa starts feeling like an actual person inside this completely absurd movie. He's still crude, still violent, still drinking. He doesn't suddenly turn into the traditional cheerful Santa halfway through, and I think that's important. The movie lets him rediscover some of that spirit without completely changing who this version of Santa is. He remains rough around the edges right to the end. That makes the redemption feel a little less manufactured. So for me, the biggest surprise in Violent Night isn't the violence. It isn't Santa swinging a hammer. It's that the movie somehow takes this intentionally ridiculous version of Santa Claus and gives him a character arc I actually bought into. And honestly, without that, I'm not sure the rest of the movie works nearly as well. If Violent Night had cast the wrong actor as Santa, this whole thing probably falls apart. That sounds obvious, but really think about the role for a second. You need somebody who can look completely exhausted, sell the comedy, handle the physical action, and still make the quieter emotional stuff feel sincere without turning the character into a parody. David Harbour somehow manages all of that. He looks like he's been doing this job for centuries and is absolutely sick of it, and that works. There's a heaviness to him that fits this version of Santa really well. He's not graceful. He's not some polished action hero. He looks tired, he gets hurt, he gets frustrated, and when he starts fighting back, it feels messy and physical rather than overly slick. Harbour also understands the joke without constantly playing the joke. That's important. He doesn't spend the whole movie winking at the audience like, can you believe Santa is doing this? He plays the character surprisingly straight. Yes, he's drunk. Yes, he swears. Yes, he beats people to death. But underneath all of that, Harbour gives Santa this genuine sadness that makes him more interesting than the concept probably deserves. And when the action starts, his physical presence helps a lot. He looks believable swinging a hammer. He looks believable getting thrown through things. There's weight behind the fights, and Harbour never feels like he's pretending to be tougher than the movie needs him to be. For me, he's easily the center of the film, but Trudy is probably the character that's going to divide people the most. She's the kid who still genuinely believes in Santa, and through that belief, she ends up becoming his emotional connection to everything happening inside the house. The walkie-talkie idea is actually pretty clever because it gives them a way to build a relationship without forcing them to spend every scene together. And Lee Brady does a good job with it. She brings a lot of sincerity to the character, and that sincerity matters because Santa needs somebody in the movie who still sees him as Santa Claus, rather than this drunk guy covered in blood. That said, I completely understand why some people find Trudy a little too sweet. There are moments where the movie goes from brutal violence to very soft Christmas sentiment, and Trudy is usually right in the middle of that shift. Sometimes it works. Sometimes it feels like you accidentally changed channels and landed on a completely different Christmas movie. And depending on how much patience you have for that kind of material, she can either be the emotional heart of the story or the point where the movie becomes too sentimental. I landed somewhere in the middle. I think the character is necessary. Without her, Santa doesn't really have much of a reason to change, but there are definitely moments where the movie pushes the sweetness harder than it needs to. Then you have John Leguizamo as Scrooge. He's having fun here. The character is basically built around hating Christmas, and Leguizamo gives him enough energy that he doesn't disappear behind all the Santa stuff. He's loud, aggressive, bitter, and he understands what kind of movie he's in. Now, is Scrooge an all-time memorable villain? Probably not. That's where I agree with some of the criticism. He's entertaining, but a lot of what makes him work is Leguizamo himself. On the page, the character can feel like a straightforward, violent criminal with a Christmas grudge. Still, Leguizamo gives the role personality. And honestly, that counts for a lot in a movie like this. Beverly D'Angelo is also a lot of fun as Gertrude. She's cold, powerful, rude, and completely comfortable treating her family like they're competing for her approval. There's something almost impressive about how unpleasant she is. She barely reacts to the criminals the way a normal person would, which tells you everything about the kind of woman this character is supposed to be. And the rest of the Lightstone family mostly exists to create chaos around her. Cam Gigandet gets some good material because his character feels like a deliberate joke about the macho action star type. He plays that exaggerated confidence just enough that you get what the movie is doing without needing somebody to explain it. Alexis Louder, Alex Hassell, Eddie Patterson, and the rest of the supporting cast all have their moments too. The problem is that the family is intentionally annoying. That's part of the joke, but it also means you're spending a lot of time with people you're not necessarily supposed to care about. Some viewers will enjoy how awful they are. Others are going to wonder why Santa is risking his life for half of these people. And honestly, fair question. The performances mostly keep those scenes alive, but whenever Harbour disappears for too long, you can feel the movie lose a little energy. That tells you how important he is, because the supporting cast is solid, Leguizamo is entertaining, D'Angelo commits completely, Trudy gives the story its emotional center, but Harbour is the one holding all of these tones together. He's the reason the comedy works. He's the reason the action works. And surprisingly, he's also the reason the sentimental parts don't completely collapse. In a movie this ridiculous, that's probably the best compliment I can give him. The actual home invasion setup in Violent Night is pretty simple. You've got this insanely wealthy family getting together for Christmas. None of them seem particularly happy to be there, and almost everybody is quietly, or not so quietly, trying to stay on Gertrude's good side because of the money. So before the criminals even show up, the house already feels hostile. Gertrude is the center of the whole family. She has the money, the power, the influence, and everybody around her knows it. You can feel that in basically every interaction. The family members aren't just celebrating Christmas together, they're performing for her, and that gives the movie a decent amount of comedy. They're selfish, petty, competitive, sometimes incredibly obnoxious. The problem is, the movie keeps reminding you of that. After a while, you understand the joke. These are rich people who mostly can't stand each other. You don't really need another scene proving it. Jason and Linda give the story at least a little bit of emotional grounding because their relationship is already falling apart, and Trudy is stuck in the middle of that. So there's something more personal happening inside the family beyond everybody chasing Gertrude's approval. But honestly, the Lightstones are intentionally difficult people to care about. That creates a strange situation once the robbery starts, because you're watching Santa risk his life to save a family where, outside of Trudy and maybe a couple of others, you're not exactly sitting there thinking, please, somebody save these people. And I think the movie knows that. The unpleasantness is part of the joke. Then Scrooge and his crew arrive looking for the $300 million hidden in the vault, and that's where the movie shifts into its die-hard style structure. The mercenaries take over the estate, kill the security, lock the family down, and assume they've planned everything well enough that the night is basically under control, except Santa Claus is still inside the house. That's the entire movie right there, and what I like is that Santa doesn't immediately decide to become the hero. He wants out. His reindeer are gone, people are shooting at him, he has absolutely no emotional investment in this rich family, and his first instinct is pretty much, this is not my problem, which feels believable for this version of Santa. It's Trudy who changes that. Once he realizes she's trapped in there and genuinely believes he can help her, his role in the story starts to change. Suddenly, the drunk guy who was trying to escape becomes the one person the criminals didn't account for. That part works really well. Scrooge himself is entertaining mostly because John Leguizamo gives him a lot of energy. He has this personal hatred of Christmas that fits the tone, and the whole Mr. Scrooge thing is exactly as subtle as you'd expect. Which is fine, this isn't exactly a subtle movie, but the villains do have a weird problem. They're introduced like highly trained professionals, yet once Santa starts moving around the house, some of them become surprisingly easy to outsmart. There are moments where you start questioning how competent these people are supposed to be, especially because the movie wants them to feel dangerous at first. That doesn't completely ruin anything, but you notice it. And then there's the larger story structure, which is probably where Violent Night feels the most familiar. Take Santa out of this movie, and you're left with a fairly standard wealthy family hostage thriller. Criminals invade. There's money in a vault, there are betrayals, there are people on the outside who may or may not be trustworthy. The family has internal problems. Eventually, everybody's secrets start coming out. We've seen versions of that setup plenty of times. So the Santa angle is doing a lot of heavy lifting. Thankfully, it's a strong enough gimmick to carry most of it, because every time the story starts feeling too familiar, Santa walks back into the movie, and suddenly you're watching a Christmas icon creeping through a mansion, trying to figure out how to kill armed mercenaries. That changes the flavor completely. The weaker stretches are usually the ones where the movie spends too much time away from him. The family arguments can drag, some of the hostage scenes are predictable, and the emotional reconciliation material starts heading exactly where you expect it to go. But once the home invasion and Santa's presence start feeding into each other, that's when the movie finds its personality. It's not that the story itself is especially original. It really isn't. The fun comes from taking an extremely recognizable action movie framework and dropping the real Santa Claus into the middle of it. And somehow, that's enough to make the familiar parts feel a lot more entertaining than they probably should. If there's one area where Violent Night understands exactly what people came to see, it's the action. The whole appeal is right there in the title. You're not watching this because you want Santa to politely negotiate with a group of armed mercenaries. You want to see what happens when the guy who normally carries a sack of toys starts reaching for whatever sharp, heavy, or vaguely festive object happens to be nearby. And the movie has a lot of fun with that. The best action scenes aren't just violent for the sake of being violent. They actually use the Christmas setting. That's what gives the fights their personality. Candy canes become weapons. Christmas lights become part of a kill. Ice skates get involved. Decorations that should be harmless suddenly look incredibly dangerous. There's something wonderfully stupid about watching Santa scan a room full of Christmas ornaments and basically turn it into an arsenal. It works because the violence is constantly fighting against the image we have of Santa Claus. This is supposed to be the warm, comforting guy who leaves presents under the tree. Here he is smashing somebody with a hammer. That contrast never really stops being funny, and David Harbour helps sell the physical side of it because the fights don't make Santa look invincible. He takes hits, he gets exhausted, he stumbles around. Sometimes he looks like he's figuring out what he's doing in real time. Then that old warrior instinct kicks in. That's when the action gets much more aggressive. The hammer sequences are probably the clearest example. Once Santa gets something in his hands that feels connected to his past, the movie almost lets him become a different person for a few minutes. There's suddenly this sense that, underneath the beard and the red suit, this guy genuinely knows how to hurt people. And some of those hits are nasty. The film gets surprisingly graphic in places. People are shot, stabbed, impaled, crushed. There's blood all over the place. Limbs and bodies take damage in ways that definitely remind you this was never intended as a family Christmas movie. You're not putting this on for the kids because Santa happens to be in it. Absolutely not. What I do like is that the gore usually has a punchline attached to it. Not always a literal joke, but some kind of visual absurdity. A brutal kill lands differently when it involves Christmas lights or a sharpened candy cane. The movie keeps looking for ways to take cheerful holiday imagery and make it horribly inappropriate. That's where it feels most inventive. There's also that Home Alone style stretch where the movie basically asks, what if those traps actually did the damage they should have done? And yeah, the answer is, people would be completely destroyed. The movie knows exactly why that idea is funny, but here's the weird thing. For a movie called Violent Night, I actually understand the criticism that it could have gone even further. There are moments where it seems oddly restrained. Sometimes the lighting is dark enough that you don't fully see the impact. Sometimes the edit cuts away right when you expect the movie to really commit to the gore. That won't bother everybody. There's still plenty of blood here. But if you went in expecting non-stop splatter from beginning to end, you might come away thinking the movie occasionally backs off at the exact moment it should be leaning in. The same thing applies to the amount of action. When the fights happen, they're good, really good actually. The choreography is generally clear, Harbour's physicality works, and you can follow what's happening without the camera shaking itself to death. I appreciated that. A lot of modern action movies can make a simple punch look like somebody threw the camera down a staircase. Violent Night is usually much cleaner than that. There are wider shots, the geography of the fights makes sense, and you're allowed to actually watch the performers move. It's not John Wick. I don't think the movie ever reaches that level of precision or sophistication. But it clearly benefits from that modern style of action, filmmaking where choreography matters, and the audience is actually allowed to see it. The stunt work is solid too. Hits have weight. People get thrown through things. Bodies crash into furniture. You can feel the physical messiness of the fights. And because Santa isn't moving like some perfectly trained assassin, the choreography has this scrappy quality that fits him. He's strong, he's experienced. He's also drunk, irritated, and probably wondering how his Christmas Eve turned into this. That makes the fights more fun. The effects are a little more uneven. Some of the practical gore looks great because it feels tangible and gross in the right way. Some of the digital blood, not so much. There are moments where you can tell the movie is adding extra splatter after the fact, and once you notice it, it does take a little bite out of the impact. Still, most of the violence works because the ideas behind it are strong enough. And honestly, I would rather watch an action scene with a ridiculous Christmas-themed concept and slightly imperfect effects than another generic shootout in a gray hallway. That's the movie's advantage. Even when the execution isn't flawless, it usually has an identity. The bigger issue for me is that there are stretches where you start wanting another fight. The movie spends a fair amount of time on the family, the hostage situation, and the sentimental material, and depending on how invested you are in that stuff, you might start getting impatient. Because once Santa starts wrecking people, that's the movie at its most alive. You can feel the energy change, the humor gets sharper, the pacing picks up, and suddenly you remember exactly why this premise sounded so fun in the first place. The soundtrack helps too. There's something beautifully wrong about violent hand-to-hand combat playing against cheerful Christmas music. That contrast is doing half the joke for them. A guy is getting absolutely destroyed, and the movie is still determined to remind you that, technically, this is the most wonderful time of the year. That's Violent Night in a nutshell. It takes all the visual language of Christmas, lights, decorations, music, candy, Santa himself, and runs it through an action movie. Sometimes it's genuinely creative. Sometimes it's just ridiculous. Most of the time, it's both, and I think that's why the action works as well as it does. You can find better choreography in other movies. You can find nastier gore in other movies. You can definitely find more sophisticated action filmmaking. But there aren't many movies where Santa Claus can beat somebody senseless with a Christmas decoration and somehow make the whole thing feel completely appropriate. Violent Night has that particular corner of the market pretty much to itself. One of the strangest things about Violent Night is that I'm still not sure what genre I'd tell someone it belongs to. It looks like horror from a distance. There's gore, there are brutal kills. People get tortured, stabbed, smashed into things. Santa spends a good portion of the movie covered in blood, but calling it a horror movie doesn't really feel right. This is much closer to an action comedy that occasionally wanders into horror territory, then suddenly remembers it's also supposed to be a sincere Christmas movie. And somehow, that mess is kind of the point. The opening tells you pretty quickly what kind of sense of humor the movie has. Santa is drinking, complaining about Christmas, swearing, generally acting like the complete opposite of the version we grew up with. That alone gets some laughs. Then the violence starts, and the movie realizes there's an entire second joke sitting right there. Santa Claus is brutally murdering people while everything around him still looks aggressively festive. Christmas lights, holiday music, decorations, red and green everything. You can almost feel the movie enjoying the contradiction. And when the comedy is working, it works because it doesn't stop every 5 minutes to explain itself. A criminal gets taken out in some absurd seasonal way. Santa looks exhausted by the whole situation. Somebody throws out a ridiculous line, and the movie keeps moving. That's enough. There are comic henchmen, exaggerated rich people, a villain literally calling himself Scrooge, and plenty of profanity. None of this is subtle. It really shouldn't be. A subtle version of this movie would probably be unbearable. The funniest moments usually come from the movie taking something familiar about Christmas and twisting it just far enough. Even the soundtrack gets involved. There's something deeply stupid, in a good way, about watching a vicious fight while cheerful Christmas music is playing underneath it. The music is telling you one thing, the image is telling you something completely different. That clash becomes part of the joke, but then Violent Night does something I wasn't really expecting. It starts getting sincere, like properly sincere. And this is where the movie is either going to win you over or lose you, because underneath the swearing, gore, and cynical Santa stuff, the film actually believes in Christmas. It isn't just mocking the holiday. At first, you might think that's exactly what it's doing. Santa hates the whole thing. The Lightstones are awful. Everybody is greedy. Christmas basically looks like an excuse for rich people to manipulate each other and kids to ask for more stuff. Then Trudy enters the equation. She still believes, not ironically, not because the movie is setting up another joke. She genuinely believes in Santa Claus, and the movie takes that seriously. That sincerity starts affecting Santa too. And I'll admit, some of it works better than I expected. There's something kind of sweet about this completely burned out Santa meeting one kid who still sees him exactly the way he's supposed to be seen. For a character who has basically lost faith in his own job, that matters. The problem is that the movie doesn't always know when to stop. There are moments where a little warmth is enough, and then it keeps going. You get conversations about belief, family, Christmas spirit, what the holiday really means, and occasionally it starts feeling like the movie has wandered into much softer territory than the rest of the story can comfortably support. That tonal swing can be wild. 1 minute somebody is being brutally attacked. A few minutes later, we're having a heartfelt Christmas conversation. Then we're back to another kill, then family reconciliation, then blood again. It's almost like two completely different Christmas movies are fighting for control, and I can see why some viewers absolutely hate that. If you came here wanting a hard, nasty black comedy, those sentimental scenes are probably going to feel like somebody slammed the brakes. There are moments where it gets genuinely mushy, maybe even a little Hallmarkish, especially when Trudy becomes the emotional center of the story, because she's coming from such an innocent place that the movie suddenly has to meet her on that level. And yeah, it can feel weird. You've got Santa behaving like a medieval warrior, and then the film wants you to get emotional about family staying together. That's a difficult combination. But I also think removing all of that sincerity would make the movie worse, because then what do you really have? A funny trailer idea stretched into a feature. Santa kills mercenaries. That's the joke. Do that for nearly 2 hours with nothing underneath it, and eventually the novelty wears off. The emotional material gives Santa an actual reason to keep going. It gives him an arc. It gives the violence something to push against. Without the warmth, the cynicism wouldn't mean much either. You need to know that this character once believed in Christmas for his disappointment to matter. You need Trudy's optimism for his exhaustion to have somewhere to go. So even when the sentimental scenes get a little too sweet for me, I understand why they're there. The issue is balance, and that balance gets shakier toward the end. Earlier in the movie, the comedy, action, and Christmas sincerity are constantly bouncing off each other. There's a weird energy to it. Later on, as the story heads toward the climax, some of that comedy fades. The movie starts taking its emotional stakes more seriously. And once that happens, you notice how important the humor was to keeping everything else in proportion. Take too much comedy away, and suddenly the sentiment feels heavier. Take too much sentiment away, and the violence becomes empty. Push the violence too far, and you risk breaking the Christmas warmth completely. That's basically the challenge Violent Night gives itself. 3 tones that shouldn't naturally fit together, all trying to occupy the same movie. Does it always pull that off? No. There are definitely moments where you can feel the gears grinding, but I'd rather watch a movie struggle with an unusual combination than play everything completely safe. And that's probably why I find its genre confusion more interesting than frustrating. It isn't really horror. It's too funny for that. It isn't just comedy because the violence has real weight. It isn't a straightforward action film because the entire thing is built around Christmas mythology. And bizarrely enough, it isn't even an anti-Christmas movie. For all its cynicism, profanity, and gore, this thing is weirdly earnest about Christmas spirit. That might be the most surprising part. Violent Night spends a lot of time making fun of Christmas movies, borrowing from them, beating them up a little bit, and then, somewhere along the way, it becomes one itself. Just with a lot more blood. You don't have to watch Violent Night for very long before you start spotting the movies sitting somewhere in its DNA. Die Hard is the obvious one. A wealthy family trapped inside a heavily secured location, armed criminals, one unexpected guy moving around outside their control, gradually turning the situation against them. It's not exactly hiding the comparison. And then there's Home Alone, which the movie goes beyond simply referencing. At one point, it basically embraces the idea outright and asks what those traps would actually look like if they happened in an R-rated movie. The answer is considerably less cute than what Kevin McAllister was doing. Then you've got a little bad Santa in Harbour's burned-out version of Saint Nick, some John Wick influence in the way the action is staged, and traces of other strange Christmas movies like Gremlins, Krampus, Fatman, Santa's Sleigh, and The Ref floating around the edges. You can keep going, Ready or Not, The Babysitter. Even Miracle on 34th Street starts feeling weirdly relevant once the movie lanes into all the belief in Santa stuff. So no, I wouldn't call Violent Night particularly original in terms of structure. It knows exactly what shelf of movies it came from. The more interesting question is whether combining all of those influences creates something with enough personality of its own. For me, sometimes it absolutely does. Because Die Hard, but the guy saving everyone is literally Santa Claus, is still a pretty strong starting point. And the movie is at its best when it takes that premise and actually thinks about what it can do with it. Don't just give Santa a gun, give him Christmas decorations, give him a candy cane, give him a hammer, use Christmas lights. Take things that normally belong in this warm, harmless holiday setting and turn them into action movie tools. That's when the film stops feeling like a collection of references and starts feeling like itself. I wish it did that more often, because whenever the Santa-specific ideas disappear, the rest of the movie can become surprisingly ordinary. The hostage setup is familiar. The dysfunctional rich family is familiar. The criminals looking for money in a vault, very familiar. Even some of the emotional beats go exactly where you think they're going. So there's this constant push and pull between a genuinely fun central idea and a story structure that keeps falling back on things we've seen before. And that's probably why the screenplay gets such mixed reactions. There are moments where the writing is actually pretty clever. The dialogue can be sharp. The movie knows how ridiculous its premise is without completely turning everything into parody. There are good little ideas everywhere. Santa not fully understanding how his own magic works, his violent past, the Christmas-themed kills, Scrooge's hatred of the holiday, all of that feels playful. But then there are scenes where the script starts leaning heavily on cliches or stretches an emotional conversation longer than it really needs to. Sometimes you can almost feel the movie thinking, okay, now we need the Christmas message. And that's where the writing gets much more conventional. I also think there was room to push Santa's mythology further. If you've already committed to the real Santa being a former warrior with unexplained magical abilities, why stop there? That is such a bizarre idea. Explore it. Give him more strange Christmas powers, more tools, more mythology, more things that could only happen because this guy is Santa Claus. Instead, the movie occasionally settles for putting Santa into a fairly normal action sequence and trusting the costume to do the rest. Luckily, Tommy Wirkola understands this kind of material. If you've seen the Dead Snow movies, you already know he's comfortable combining violence with comedy without acting embarrassed about either one, and that confidence matters here. A movie like Violent Night could become painfully self-conscious very quickly. You know the type. Every character keeps making jokes about how stupid the premise is because the filmmakers seem nervous that the audience might laugh at the wrong thing. Wirkola mostly avoids that. He just commits. Santa is real. The violence is real. The magic is real. The absurdity is real. Fine, let's go. There's an energetic quality to the direction when the movie gets moving, especially during the action scenes. The fights generally have enough space to breathe. You can see what's happening. The camera isn't constantly trying to create excitement by shaking around or cutting every half second. That might sound like a small thing, but it makes a huge difference. When somebody gets hit, you can actually see the setup and the impact. When a stunt happens, the movie often lets you watch the stunt. That sounds embarrassingly basic, but action movies still mess this up all the time. The production design helps too. The Lightstone estate gives the movie a giant Christmas playground to work with. decorations are everywhere. Lights, ornaments, fireplaces, expensive furniture, snow outside. It looks festive enough that the violence feels even more inappropriate. And that contrast is basically the visual identity of the movie. Everything says Christmas. Everything happening inside that Christmas environment says absolutely not. The props are especially important because so many of them eventually become part of the action. A Christmas decoration can't just look nice in the background if Santa is going to pick it up later and use it on somebody. That kind of setup makes the mansion feel less like a generic location and more like part of the joke. The effects are mostly solid. Some of the practical stuff has real weight to it, especially when bodies are hitting objects or the movie gets into the nastier physical damage. The digital work is more inconsistent. There are a few moments where the blood looks obviously added, and when the movie is already going so hard on the violence, fake-looking splatter can pull you out of it. Not enough to ruin the scene, but enough to notice. The editing gets mixed results too. During the better fights, it's clean and readable. Elsewhere, especially when the movie wants to hide an impact or move through a kill quickly, you can feel it cutting around the violence. Some viewers probably won't care. If you came for maximum gore, you might. The soundtrack, though, knows exactly what movie it's in. Using cheerful Christmas music over people beating each other senseless is an easy joke, but it works. Bryan Adams' Christmas Time, playing against brutal action, is the sort of choice that tells you Wirkola isn't interested in subtle irony. Neither are Slade or Burl Ives exactly being used to make the movie feel restrained. The music keeps reminding you that this is still supposed to be festive, even when somebody is getting absolutely wrecked. And that pretty much sums up the filmmaking approach. Take something familiar, push it in the wrong direction. See if it becomes funny. A lot of the time it does. The bigger issue is originality, because there's a difference between being self-aware about your influences and actually escaping them. Violent Night never completely escapes them. Sometimes you can practically see Die Hard standing behind the movie. Sometimes Home Alone steps directly into frame. And there are moments where it feels less like inspiration and more like the film checking off things it knows the audience will recognize. But I don't think that automatically makes the movie lazy. The filmmakers clearly know what they're borrowing. The best scenes use those references as a starting point rather than the entire joke. The weaker scenes just remind you of better or more famous movies. That's the line Violent Night is constantly walking. And weirdly, the thing that saves it is Santa. Take him out and I'm not sure there's much here you haven't seen before. Put David Harbour back in the suit, give him Christmas magic, a warrior history, and something festive to hit somebody with, and suddenly the movie has a personality again. So I wouldn't call Violent Night groundbreaking. Not even close, it borrows openly, sometimes shamelessly. But when Wirkola, Harbour, and the writers stop trying to recreate the movies they clearly love and start asking, okay, what would our Santa do with this? That's when the film becomes much more interesting. And honestly, that's the version of Violent Night I wanted even more of. The biggest thing holding Violent Night back for me is probably the pacing. Not because the movie is boring all the way through. It isn't. When Santa is actually moving through the house, fighting people, improvising weapons, or just being miserable in a very funny way, the movie has a lot of energy. The problem is what happens in between. There are stretches where everything slows down for another family argument, another hostage conversation, another emotional beat, and you can feel yourself waiting for the movie to get back to the part that made the premise exciting in the first place. That's where the runtime starts to show. At around an hour and 46 minutes, this isn't some ridiculously long movie, but it feels longer than it needs to because not every section carries the same weight. A tighter cut probably would have helped a lot. Trim some of the family material, shorten a few of the sentimental exchanges, get back to Santa sooner, because every time Harbour disappears for too long, the movie loses something. Now I should say not everybody is going to feel that way. There are people who think the movie moves perfectly fine from beginning to end, and I get it. If you're enjoying the Lightstone family drama, the jokes, the Christmas message, all of that, then the downtime probably doesn't feel like downtime at all. But if you're mainly here for Santa turning a home invasion into a massacre, there are definitely moments where you start checking how long it's been since the last real action scene, and that connects to another issue. The movie has a great central idea, but it doesn't always squeeze everything it can out of it. A violent Santa with a warrior past and actual Christmas magic sounds like the setup for something completely insane. Sometimes the movie gets there. Sometimes it settles for being a fairly standard hostage thriller with Santa standing in the middle of it. That's the frustrating part. You can see the better, stranger version of the movie hiding inside the one we got. More Christmas magic would have helped. More Santa-specific weapons. More situations that could only exist in this movie. Instead, a lot of the surrounding plot is familiar enough that if you removed Santa, you'd probably know exactly where most of it was going. The family problems are predictable, the villains fit recognizable types, the emotional reconciliation is pretty easy to see coming, and the third act gets softer than I expected. That's probably where the sentimentality becomes most noticeable. The movie spends so much time building this rude, violent, cynical personality that whenever it suddenly leans hard into the emotional Christmas stuff, the transition can feel awkward. Again, I don't hate that material. Some of it actually works, but there are moments where it feels like the film is afraid to let the darker version of itself fully win. And I think that's why reactions to Violent Night are all over the place. A lot depends on what movie you thought you were walking into. If the trailers made you think this was basically a Christmas horror movie, you might be disappointed. It's gory, sure, there are horror elements, but this is much more action comedy than horror. And if you went in expecting nonstop brutality because the word violent is literally in the title, you may also feel like the movie pulls back more often than expected. There are some nasty kills, no question, but it isn't 2 hours of uninterrupted splatter. On the other hand, if you walked in expecting nothing more than a dumb Santa fights criminals gimmick, the movie might surprise you. That seems to be where a lot of the strongest positive reactions come from. People expected something disposable and found a movie with a little more heart, better action than expected, and a David Harbour performance that actually gives the concept some weight. That gap between expectation and reality is interesting, because the film is almost impossible to market cleanly. Is it horror? Not really. Is it family Christmas entertainment? Definitely not. Is it a straight action movie? Kind of, but then you've got magical Santa Claus and sincere holiday messaging sitting right next to it. Is it a parody? Sometimes. Is it secretly earnest? Also yes. So depending on which version of the movie the marketing sold you, you could easily end up either pleasantly surprised or slightly annoyed. And then there's the bigger question. Does this become one of those movies people watch every Christmas? I can actually see it happening. There's a certain kind of Christmas movie that becomes a tradition specifically because it's not traditional. Die Hard has lived in that conversation forever. Gremlins has its crowd. Bad Santa definitely has its crowd. And Violent Night has enough personality that I can imagine people pulling it out every December when they've had enough of the usual cozy stuff. It's easy to see the appeal. You've got David Harbour as Santa. You've got ridiculous kills. You've got Christmas music playing over violence. You've got just enough actual holiday spirit that it still feels like a Christmas movie rather than an action film that happened to be set in December. That combination is specific enough to give it replay value, but I'm not completely convinced it reaches classic status, at least not for everybody. The movie has memorable moments. I'm less sure it has a memorable whole. That's an important difference. You remember the hammer. You remember the candy cane. You remember Santa covered in blood. You remember Harbour's performance. But parts of the actual plot blur together because so much of it follows familiar beats. And that's why I understand the people who call it a one-time watch. For some viewers, this is going straight into the annual Christmas rotation. For others, it's one of those movies where you have fun, finish it, and then 6 months later realize you barely remember anything outside the kills. I'm somewhere between those two reactions. I enjoyed it. There's enough here that I'd absolutely watch parts of it again, especially the action sequences, and Harbour alone makes the movie worth revisiting. But I also think it leaves a little too much potential on the table to become the instant alternative Christmas classic it clearly wants to be. Maybe that changes over time. Cult Christmas movies don't always become traditions immediately. Sometimes they just sit around for a few years until people start rediscovering them every December. And honestly, Violent Night feels like exactly the kind of movie that could happen to. Not perfect, not especially original, a little too long, a little too sentimental, sometimes much more conventional than the premise deserves. But when it works, it really works. And if your idea of Christmas entertainment involves David Harbour swinging a hammer at armed criminals while holiday music plays in the background, yeah, you could do a lot worse.